And so depending on the instructor, uh, people may reach the black belt level or junior black belt level, EQ, brown belt, whatever, and never have been taught how to think about their karate.
Kia ora, welcome to the Invisible Sensei podcast. Karate, Kudo, Judo, Jiu-Jitsu, whatever the style of preference, we all have our own stories and experiences. We are all our own Invisible Sensei. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook and YouTube. And again, thanks for taking time to listen.
And so I find that with some of my athletes, that's the situation that we're in when we first get somebody new. I ask them questions all the time. And you can see, like, what are you doing there? Why is do you know what your knee is doing? Do you know what your foot is doing when you're moving? No. Why not? Okay, and that's a physical self-awareness. And so it takes a long time to get people to, well, maybe not always a long time, depending on the people. It can take a long time to get them to become self-aware of what their body's actually doing. And so I have to work with them a long time to see what your knee is doing. Look right there. And part of that is if we're not interacting all the time, then I encourage them to set up a video camera and record. And I do this with myself. Last week or the week before I went on a business trip, and I set the camera up and I recorded myself doing a couple kata. And I realized that when I was doing a punching technique, because my body was in motion, my hand actually came out. Even though I didn't realize it, my hand came out before I went and did this technique, instead of staying glued to my body and punching from right there. Because my body was already in motion, I was focused so much on what my feet, what my body was doing, that I just kind of let my shoulder and my hand go, and it kind of came off my body and almost looked like this hook punch. And I didn't even realize it until I watched the video. And so it takes a long time to get people to think about their karate and to be able to apply the concepts that we're trying to work on instead of just doing karate. Well, Sensei told me to turn around and do this technique, get in this stance and do this technique. But what I want them to do is to focus more on the how they're doing it, what their hips are doing, how they're rotating their hip and their hip socket before when they turn around or change directions. So it takes a while for people to get out of that ichi, san, shi, go, roku. Okay, now we're gonna punch, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and go through the motions. Because when you're going through the motions in a group class setting, oftentimes what I find is people are just going through the motions. They're not actively and consciously engaged in the physical movements themselves. And I don't know if that's a generational thing or not, the attention, lack of attention or inability to, with phones and stuff like that to remain focused. I don't know, but it's something that I've experienced recently. When I was in the karate club, 1993 maybe, we didn't have cell phones. There was no such thing as cell phones. And so, when you're in the dojo, the other thing I've noticed too, and it kind of with that attention, is the second you, and it's a difference in maybe mindset, or it's not being explained very well, is the second you stop, everybody stands up. Second you stop counting or the technique's done, or I go to instruct somebody else, the other people automatically just stand up and lose focus, if you will. They're not maintaining their stances, maintaining the pose or whatever, and waiting for the next command. And so there's that, it's hard to get that focus on that concentration of maintaining what you've got. You be ready to react to the next command and maintain your focus, because that's your awareness of, if we take that out of the dojo training and we put it into a physical confrontation training, for example, that's your ability to stay focused on the environment that you're surrounded with. You're not just giving it up right away to go look at your phone. Oh, the phone beeped, so I've got to, I felt my phone vibrate. I've got to pull it out of my pocket right now and take my eyes off the environment that I'm in.
It's funny, when you were just articulating that, I was thinking, man, sometimes karate classes as they are done now can be you're creating almost a Pavlovian response to stimulus. And it's so true, it's funny, I've kind of, what's the word, I've had a word with my students. If someone walks into the dojo early on, people just turn around and have a look. People go, and I'm going, one, we've got a small dojo, but we've got windows, and we've got, not windows, sorry, mirrors at the front of our dojo. I'm going, use your awareness and just look in the mirrors. You don't need to turn.
In a dojo that I was at several years ago, and again, it's very common in other dojos, when a student comes in on the mat, they'll bow in and then they'll go to the other black belts and they'll bow and do whatever. And so one thing that I experienced is predominantly with younger people, that's what they were trained to do. They were trained to do that. So there were several instances to where I was doing kata and they would come up and try to bow and get a response in the middle of somebody doing kata. And to me, again, that goes back to that Pavlovian response. This is what I was told to do, not let me think about it and be self-aware enough that, hey, maybe I shouldn't interrupt my senpai or my sensei when he's doing his kata. So I can just stay back 5 or 6 paces, bow and continue on, and I will still show the required respect. But they would come right up in front. And it's that awareness of what's going on in your environment versus that Pavlovian response, which is kind of still a training issue, I think, that we need to, we should, as instructors, we should address and make sure that when we're in our class that we're doing, like you said, continue what we're doing and explain what's going on after the fact. But
when we first met, what was interesting to me was we were in a group kind of a forum on Zoom, and you kept referring to and speaking to training your athletes, which I thought was really interesting at the time because we hadn't then really spent much time together or talked much or caught up. And I was wondering why, I was going, doesn't he mean his students or his karateka and those sort of things? And then getting to know the Apex, I guess, methodology that you've created, the biomechanical approach, the sporting approach, and training athletes. Let me ask you this question. Are you an athlete? Are you a karateka? Are you a karateka who's athletic, or an athlete who happens to do some karate? Are you both, or are you neither? Go.
This is where I find, to use to borrow a word from Jocko, right? If you've listened to the Jocko podcast, there's a dichotomy, and I find this within myself a lot, because again, if you've listened to my history, my interview with Josh on the Okinawa Karate podcast. So after I lived in Japan, I went back to university and in the United States, and there was actually a branch dojo of the organization that I belonged with when I was in Japan in the state where I lived. And so I made the sensei there was actually my senpai in the university. And so I made the connection there when I returned. I didn't know that there was that connection beforehand, but I made that connection afterwards, and ultimately ended up through those connections and training, becoming a member of the U.S. national team. So I competed the World Championships, Pan American Championships, U.S. Nationals, things like that for a couple of years doing team kata. So, but then after that, life happens, you get married, you move, get a job, grow up, things like that. And so we ended up moving to California. And I began to train with Oshiro Toshihiro Sensei and learning Yamane-ryu Bojutsu and things like that. So over time, and then I began to coach some athletes who had asked for coaching based on being a former national team member and doing team kata and things like this. And that's kind of what was in many ways the impetus for what now is Apex Karate Performance. So again, to use this word dichotomy, I fight this battle within myself, because karate is going to be in the Olympics this year. It's supposed to be last year. Now we have the 2021 Olympics, and karate is going to be in there. And so it's an Olympic sport. And on a personal level, for Michael and Michael's karate, Michael doesn't care anything about the Olympics or competition. It's not, my goal is not to be to
blasphemy.
So there are moments when I just want to walk away from all of it. I look at some of the things, and you've mentioned this in some of your videos, you look at some of the things that the WKF competitors are doing now, and you're like, what is that? There's a Japanese female athlete that I really like, her kata. And unfortunately, she lost a lot of my respect last year when she arbitrarily just changed her kata for competition. And without getting into details. But the worst part is the judges allowed that. WKF competition, you're judged by your athletic performance and your technical performance. The technical performance is worth 70% of your score. The athletic performance is only worth 30% of your score. And by giving her good scores, they allowed it. Guess what happened the next tournament, the next month in the Premier League? Somebody else did that same thing. They had changed their kata and copied what she had done. A couple months later, I watched a junior Japanese athlete do the exact same thing. And so when I see these things, and this is the opposite of what APEX stands for. Our karate, when we compete, is that we are going to win with good karate. We are going to do good karate, and we're going to see if we can win, right? That's the goal, is to propel my athletes doing good karate. We don't gi slap. We're not stomping unnecessarily. We're not changing kata. We may tweak somebody's movement or whatever, a hand movement based on, their physical limitations or, an ankle injury or something like that. But we're not fundamentally changing the direction of the kata or taking one ending of one kata and mixing it with the other because I liked how it turns out better. No, we're not going to do that. So on a personal level, my competitive time is over, right? I have no interest in, in fact, I've done better in competitions where I didn't care about the outcome. And so my emphasis now is for Michael's personal karate is on my bojutsu, my kobudo, doing my kata. I've been focusing on a handful of very specific kata, non-competition kata and things like that. My shimaha shorin kata. But the flip side of that is I have athletes whose goal it is to become a member of the U.S. national team or their respective country's national team and to compete internationally. And so my goal with that is to help them achieve their goal. So Michael may not want to compete per se, but Michael wants to help those athletes in the competitive environment achieve their goals. And so And even amongst them, they all come from different backgrounds. Some of them grew up that competition was kind of what karate was. Yes, they were in the dojo, and yes, they earned ranks and, moved up through the belts and became, shodan or whatever. But there was always this, hey, we're going to go to when is the next tournament? When are we going to go to this next tournament? When are we going to do this? And so that was kind of their thing, was their identity was kind of tied up into their competitive results. Whereas another athlete, for example, just recently, within the past couple of years, started competing. His entire time growing up, they would go to a local tournament or whatever if it happened, but it was never the goal or the process or part of it. And so to answer your question it's kind of all of those things put together. Because you can do both as long as you're honest about what you're doing. If you're a WKF Kumite competitor, and there are many positive aspects about that you can learn: distance, timing, footwork, having, being used to things coming towards you and having to block and dodge and move, and your spatial awareness and awareness of the ring and awareness of your environment and awareness of your opponent. Those are all positive things that can be applied into a real world street aspect because it's that awareness. Maybe not the exact techniques themselves. You see the meme, Dad, what happened, son? Why do you have a black eye? Well, I scored a point on him and he kept hitting me, right? Everybody's seen that meme. And so that's why we say, oh, well, karate is not, competition. Kumite is not practical for the street. That's right. But there are many aspects of it that can aware you. Because, one thing, I hear often is, and you see it on these Facebook groups and you see whatever is, oh, that's not practical. That's not real life. Our traditional karate, our bunkai, whatever. Okay, well, dude, how many times in the last month have you actually been hit in the face? I have a friend who's competing or been kicked in the head, right? How many times does that actually happen? Are you used to getting that contact? And maybe you are, and maybe you're not, but you can be both. As long as you're honest with yourself and as long as you're honest with everybody else, you can practice karate and practice bunkai, and you can practice all of those traditional things and still do competition and still be an athlete, because in that aspect, it is a sport. So I find it both. That it's possible, is like I said, as long as you're honest with yourself about what you're doing, and as long as you're honest with everybody else.
I think that when you talk sports in terms of, as you rightly say with the rabbity, is traditional circles, the term sport is sort of an anathema to a lot of people. So with that in mind, and just purely because to be totally honest with you, brother, I'm quite interested in just your take on it. Let's say you were talking about your sensei and how he trained, he would go and train after dark with a sensei, train in the yard or on the porch or on the deck or wherever, and then take a mid-level athlete who's worked with you for a time, they've got some talent, take them out of the setting of tournament and put them at that time. They've walked in the gate, they've bowed a sensei, they've done all they need to do, and they're out there putting that hat on, if it's possible. And this is pure conjecture, I realize, brother. What do you think the reaction's going to be?
Well, if they're my athlete, they're probably kind of used to that, because I ask my athletes and my students, because I actually have two things going on right now. Here where I'm at, I actually have a non-competition, like a regular dojo class that I teach once a week for a community program, and they're all beginners. Some people have previous experience before, but essentially it's a group of now yellow belts, 9th Q or 8th Q, whatever we're at right now. And my purpose with my athletes is, again, to teach them, kind of like what you were talking about earlier, is to get them to think about karate. So if they're one of our athletes, an Apex athlete, they should already be aware enough to be able to engage in that. Because first of all, the majority of our training is one-on-one. Sometimes we'll do group things. Back when I was in the United States, we would do group things, but it wouldn't be a group class, for example, unless we were going over a specific topic and I wanted to cover something with everybody. There would be 3 people, for example. 3 people could be training and I'm watching all 3, and I'll go over and give guidance to one and then turn around and see, no, don't do that. Did you feel what you just did with your leg right there? That's why you lost balance, because you put your foot down that way. And so all of our athletes are used to getting that one-on-one. It's almost like that on a full-time basis, is that they're getting one-on-one guidance and instruction. So they should be able to interact with that. My goal, to turn it around to that sensei, if you're talking, for example, is that hopefully that if that was, some other sensei, that they would be able to understand what our athletes were doing.